I think it's always important to remember when people talk about reparations that we're not just talking about slavery, although that's an important part of the story.
Absolutely.
They're talking about discrimination that persisted into the middle of the 20th century and really shaped the economy.
Hey y'all. So we are recording this episode the week of Juneteenth. And of course, this is the run-up to the 250th anniversary of the United States. Now, I done already told y'all, America is about to throw itself a birthday party it does not deserve. And then they had the nerve to ring it in by desecrating the White House grounds for a damn cage match, where folks were throwing trash and fighting in the audience. Where are the parents? I mean, are there any fathers in the home? Reckless. Then they closed up their raggedy prelude by insulting the one and only Michelle Obama with a nod to how white supremacy has never, and I mean never, included Black women in its definition of womanhood. But true to our name, and the Toni Morrison who gave it to us, we know that white supremacy and all his sons are but a distraction. They are here to keep us from doing our work, to have us explaining over and over and over again our very reason for being. So bump all that. We're actually going to be thinking about what matters at a time like this, about history, about possibility, about radical imagination that shouldn't actually be all that radical. For me, that means my mind has been on the question of reparations, and specifically reparations for Black folks in America, which is an issue that y'all know I care about, not just politically, but personally. My ancestors built this joint for free. My granddaddy fought in y'all's wars and never got his GI Bill. And my mama is older than her voting rights. Repair ain't a game for me, and it shouldn't be for America either. So we're going to be exploring the issue of reparations on the pod this summer and hearing from some of the most interesting people I know about it. Yes, now is always a time to discuss reparations. Today's guest is the one and only Adam Serwer, my friend and superstar writer for The Atlantic. He's going to help us put everything in perspective. And you know what? I don't think we actually need to talk much more about that UFC nonsense on the White House grounds. We're going to stay focused because we are undistracted. So I want to tell y'all a story. Picture preteen me. I live in St. Louis, North St. Louis County to be exact. It's summertime. The Iggy's, that's frozen yogurt, y'all, is flowing. The sprinklers are running in the front lawn. And you know, I'm just minding my good Black childhood carefree business. And in I walk to our house and I see a copy of a book on my parents' bookshelf. It's called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. Now, as you can imagine, seeing this definitely shook me to my core. I was like, what in the world is this about? And let me tell you, that is a book I have visited a few times to make sure I fully understand it, to make sure I wrap my arms around it. And when I think about the word reparations, I think about myself back then, really beginning to unfurl just how history is not actually history. How the economic violence that started in enslavement did not end with slavery because it just compounds. It shows up in the neighborhood that isn't safe, in the health outcome that comes too early, in the school that doesn't have enough. Less money, generation after generation, robs Black children of their health, their safety, their education, and their future. That's why we're talking about reparations now. Because before Juneteenth, before the 4th of July, before this season that this country loves to call freedom, I say, let's not flinch. Let's not soften things. Let's not get weak. This is America's chance to begin again, to really confront our history. And I'm excited that my guest today is the perfect person to talk about that. Adam Serwer is a staff writer at The Atlantic, where he spent nearly a decade covering the intersection of race, power, and American democracy. If you've heard people using the phrase, "the cruelty is the point," those are Adam's words. It was the title of his now iconic 2018 essay about Donald Trump's strategy, and then a book on the subject. And Adam has been one of the most important voices helping us understand what is actually happening in this country and why. He's thought extensively about reparations, and I'm really honored to have him here with us. Adam, welcome to Undistracted. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So listen, we're doing a few conversations on reparations, and we absolutely had to talk to you. But before we start this conversation, I have to ask you what we ask everybody: how are you doing today in 3 words?
This is
This is
why is
always
this
a
such a hard
challenge.
question to answer?
Hmm.
I'm doing great. How about that?
I'm doing great. I appreciate the positivity, but you have to tell me why it took you a second, why you hesitated.
I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by, everything that's happening in the world.
Hmm.
On the other hand, I'm very grateful for my wife and my children. So,
Yeah.
it's tough. It's tough not to be thankful in some sense.
Hmm.
And in a weird way, I mean, maybe it's not weird. Everything horrible happening elsewhere in the world is sort of a reminder to be thankful of the stuff that's going right
Mm.
for you. So,
Mm. Perspective matters, and gratitude is a perspective giver for certain. Before we dive into the reparations of it all, let's keep talking a little bit about this current moment because you've spent nearly a decade at The Atlantic writing about some of the most shocking and really unconventional stories of our political moment, from Trump and birthright citizenship to the ongoing attack on voting rights. You really did coin the phrase, the cruelty is the point, and helped us characterize exactly what we're facing so often these days. Given how much has happened, is there a story um, from this second Trump term that you think is flying under the radar? Something that you're still processing that's not getting the kind of attention that it deserves?
I wouldn't say it's going under the radar, but I really
Mm-hmm.
do think, I wrote a piece early in the Trump administration called The Great Resegregation.
You did.
And basically, my argument was that, you know, uh, the ideologues who run the Trump administration have been infuriated. They've been angered by
Mm.
the slight level of integration that has occurred in elite spaces. And I say
Mm-hmm.
slight because when you look at the metrics in terms of like housing, schools, jobs, things really haven't budged that much in terms of integration since the 90s. But if you look at like Congress has gotten a lot more diverse. In show business, there were, more black writers, more black characters, more
Yeah.
black showrunners. In the media, there were more black figures, especially in elite spaces at a time when, the industry itself was largely collapsing. And so like what was left is sort of these elite jobs with a lot of competition, where some white people became very resentful of what they felt like jobs that they were entitled to going to people who were supposed to be subjects of journalism rather than,
Right.
its authors. And the Trump administration has been using the power of the federal government essentially to reverse the gains of the civil rights movement. Now,
Mm-hmm.
they've had a lot of help with that from the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, is arguably going to be, in terms of like the long term threat, the bigger issue going forward.
Yeah.
But you look at things like they're doing, like, suing colleges over their classes being too diverse. That is a backdoor racial quota. And that's the kind of thing that I said they were going to do. But essentially, what they want is they want to take this level of elite integration that occurred, this sort of, I don't want to understate it or overstate it. It was
Mm-hmm.
real. It was small, but it was real. And they want to reverse that. They want to
Yeah.
protect elite spaces and make them as white as possible again. If they have to utilize a few tokens to do that, they will, as long as those tokens are on board with that project. And I think they are using the tremendous influence of the federal government to essentially make that happen. I mean, if you are, an employer or a college and you're worried you might get sued by the government because
Mm-hmm.
your workforce or your student body is too diverse, the easiest thing to do is just not to hire anybody who isn't white. And they know that, and they know that that's what they're doing. I mean, you look at, and this is occurring, especially I think when you look at something like Doge, because of widespread discrimination in the private sector, public sector anti-discrimination protections were, a big part of building the black middle class in the second half
Yep.
of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And so, these attacks on all these government jobs, which didn't actually save any money, hit a lot of, they hit a lot of black people. They hit a lot of black women in particular. You look at the military, another big engine of the construction of the black middle class in the latter half of the 20th century. And Pete Hegseth is literally going through and trying to prevent women and black people from being promoted when he can.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff is about preventing a black elite class that can advocate for black interests. We've had a lot of conversations about the perils of thinking that representation is sufficient. And I think that that's a perfectly good conversation to have. But when we're talking about things that may seem silly, things like, why is there a black Little Mermaid, or why are there black hobbits, whatever, these conversations may sound silly, but what they're actually about is labor. You're
right.
talking about jobs. You're talking about people
That's
getting
right.
jobs. The fact that they're in a creative industry, maybe, you're an adult, you're like, I'm not going to go see The Little Mermaid, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But, number one, these are black people, black creatives who are getting jobs because of work like this. And number two, I think people, especially in children's content, can underestimate the extent to which children are, shaped by what they see. And if what they
Absolutely.
see is exclusively white people,
That's right.
they're going, black children are going to get the sense that they are not normal and feel ashamed of who they are. And that's something that as a parent, you can try to counteract.
Yeah.
But if the world is speaking in that one singular voice, it can be very difficult. This use of federal government authority to pressure employees, colleges, and ultimately creative industries to exclude black people as students, as workers, and as leaders is something really important. I think it's going to have, pretty big downstream effects.
We're talking about shaping a society, right? Can I, as a black child, see myself in any of these places or not? Can you, as a white child, see black children or black people in any of these places, roles,
As
your
belonging
boss,
in those places,
manager,
yeah.
as belonging in those places, as your president? Is that possible for you? Because if you never see it, not only does it feel impossible, it feels wrong to you in some kind of way, right? Which I think honestly is a perfect segue into this conversation about reparations, because there are so few people, it seems, who are able to imagine the idea of repair for enslaved black people and their descendants in America and the Americas. And I really want to talk about how reparations fits into this moment. Adam, if we keep it a buck, there are people who are listening who may feel like reparations is a great idea, but also the house is on fire. So like, why are we talking about this right now? We got to turn people out to vote. There's so many other things on the plate. How do you define reparations, and how do you think it fits into this larger landscape of incredibly pressing, urgent issues?
The simplest and perhaps broadest framework for understanding it has, been put forth by Sandy Darity, who argues, for cash payments for victims of specific things like slavery, like discrimination under the, things like the GI Bill, the big New Deal reforms that excluded black people, but were essentially the, engine of prosperity for the American middle class in the mid 20th century. And I think it can get complicated when you talk about slavery because, there are obviously a lot of black people in America who have suffered discrimination, but their families may have come later. So, obviously, if your family was enslaved in Jamaica rather than the United States, and then you moved to the United States after emancipation, you may have faced a different kind of discrimination, but it's all rooted in the same thing. I mean, when we talk about, I don't know how many, cases in New York, for example, that have involved, police shootings of black people, unjustified police shootings. And those people were not necessarily African American, as we think of the term, that is, black people who are descended from people who were enslaved in the United States, but they were still black. And the cops, they don't check to see, when people discriminate against black people in the United States, they're like, are you Nigerian? But are you, are you from Jamaica? You know what I mean? Like, that's not the way it works. So I think it does become a sort of complicated question. I do think ultimately it's an issue of political will. Is there a will to do this thing?
Yeah.
And I think if, at the point that there becomes a will to do it, it becomes a lot easier. Um, and I think to some extent, part of the issue right now is we're living through obviously a sort of
Hell.
almost redemption level backlash to
Mm-hmm.
2020, to Black Lives Matter, where people are almost you see what's happening on sort of Elon Musk's propaganda network X, and the way that is
Mm-hmm.
influencing things, not just in the United States but around the world, mainstreaming sort of a global segregationist ideology,
Yeah.
which holds that like certain countries, especially European countries, are sort of the collective property of white
Mm-hmm.
people, and you are assaulting them with your presence if you are not white.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're sort of in a very dangerous moment for for minority rights, but not just minority ethnic minorities in these communities, because ultimately authoritarianism is about. I mean, as we saw in Minnesota with Renee Good and Alex Pretty, when the government decides you are outside of that sphere of protection,
Right.
it can kill you just as easily,
Yeah.
even if you don't fit that category of other that they're trying to define in some way. But yeah, I mean, I think it sort of depends what specific reparations for what specific act of discrimination you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But the way Darity has talked about it is he's talked about it as he's sort of calculated it cumulatively through the racial wealth gap, because he sees that as, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, but he sees that as representing the sort of cumulative effect
You're right.
of discriminatory actions against Black people in the United States over time.
Which is always relevant. I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking 12 years ago, another stalwart voice on this, Ta-Nehisi Coates, in 2014, publishes the now famous The Case for Reparations, also in The Atlantic. And you were working at MSNBC at the time. And you were one of the really early voices pointing out that you felt like people were really misreading this piece, that it wasn't primarily about slavery, but about the deliberate ways that public policy has kept Black Americans and Black people in America out of wealth building, as you just shared, particularly through housing discrimination. What was the misunderstanding that you felt like people had? And why is that reframe that you and Darity and Coates point out so important?
So I want to point out that, and you can go back and you can look at Ta-Nehisi's writing on his blog, that he was initially very skeptical of the idea of reparations. He doesn't start
Mm-hmm.
out, convinced this is a good idea, but the way he comes to it, I think a lot of people are like, well, slavery was a long time ago. But then when you understand everything that happened after slavery, the case starts to make a
Right.
lot more sense. When you talk about convict leasing, Jim Crow segregation, the fact that the United States was not really a full democracy until 1965, where Black people everywhere in the country could vote. The fact that discrimination on the basis of race in employment was not illegal until 1964.
Mm-hmm.
School segregation was not illegal until the 1950s. So this, it's not really about slavery. It's about things that happened within the lifetime of, your parents or grandparents,
Yeah.
depending on how you look at it. My mother, uh, you know, uh, could recall traveling on the Jim Crow car from Florida to New York
Yeah.
when her parents moved to the north so that her and my uncle did not have to go to segregated schools in Florida. And so, that's within our lifetime.
That's
Not
right.
my lifetime, but like within the lifetime of people who are alive today. Slavery is a part of the story, but the point is that this did not end in 1865 or 1867. It persisted for a very long time. And now, whatever progress has been made
Yeah.
has become an excuse to dismantle that progress, and make sure that people who want to discriminate are able
Mm-hmm.
to do that if they feel like it. I mean, if you look at the
Yeah.
Supreme Court's recent Voting Rights Act rulings, not just Louisiana v. Calais, but its follow up on the shadow docket. They're essentially saying, well, if you have a partisan reason for wanting to discriminate against black people
Right.
in voting, then it's okay. And it's like, well, then what was the point of the 15th Amendment? Because at the time it
Right.
was adopted, you know, Democrats, white supremacist Democrats, did not want black Republicans to vote. It was a
Mm-hmm.
partisan interest. And
Mm-hmm.
so their standard, as applied today, would not have stopped, the devices that were used to implement essentially a form of racial apartheid in the South. So it's I think it's always important to remember when people talk about reparations that we're not just talking about slavery, although that's an important part of the story. They're
Absolutely.
talking about discrimination that persisted into the middle of the 20th century and really shaped the economy, as it functions even in the present.
What then do you say to people who are like, well, a lot of people got discriminated against in that era, right? That it was not just black people who were experiencing discrimination in the nearly 90 years that Jim Crow was the law of the land or beyond then. What about folks who think we're just opening up Pandora's box when we frame reparations in that way?
I mean, I think potentially that's true. I think the question is, do you set up a criteria that allows people to get redress for specific wrongs? And if you
Mm-hmm.
do that, then you avoid the Pandora's box. To some extent, you look at something like the PPP loans during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
got money through that they shouldn't have gotten, but nobody really gets mad about that because the people who would normally get mad about that very
Mm-hmm.
much supported PPP loans. So I think to some extent, yes, I do think it's a problem, but I think there's it's not the biggest problem. It's something that you can figure out in order through the claims process to make sure that people are meeting eligible criteria. I
Mm-hmm.
think people say that because they simply don't like the idea.
Yeah.
And I think what Sandy Darity says when he has written about this is just like, look, if you think you have a claim against the U.S. government for discrimination or for some wrong that they committed against you, then you should make that claim.
That's right.
My focus is this, but like, if the U.S. government did something wrong to somebody, they should probably redress that, regardless of what the
Mm-hmm.
issue is. And so when you put it like that, it seem the objections can seem a little petty.
Yeah.
I think especially in a context where the president the current president of the United States is trying to get reparations for people who tried to overthrow the government on his behalf. And there's a lot of resistance to that. Okay, I don't want to understate it, but
Yes.
the fact that
Yes.
it went down fine with the people who would normally object to reparations for an actual
Reparations
wrong
as an
that was
idea.
committed. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Well, let's say we effectively move those people out of the way and we finally prepared America's appetite to really have this conversation in a thoughtful way. Let's say that people are listening and they're ready to open up their eyes and ears about this. We've got some examples of truth and reconciliation processes from South Africa, Canada, Germany. What are the lessons we should be learning from other countries about what worked well and what didn't, frankly?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of Canada, it was like very specific, right? It was
Mhm.
specific people from a specific region who had gone through the schools, um, where they had experienced all these horrible things, and I think that kind of specificity is the way to do it because it can alleviate the sense that people are getting away with something. So when you define the harm in a very specific way, I think it makes it clear that this isn't just about handouts; it's about fixing a problem that the government itself created.
Right.
I think obviously, Ta-Nehisi discussed Germany's Holocaust reparations in his
Hmm.
essay. The South African issue is more complicated because they've really sort of never been able to do it on a large scale, and I think in some ways the issue there is really the lack of promise fulfilled after the end of apartheid because
Mm.
a lot of the black majority in South Africa still lives in pretty bad conditions. There has been,
Right.
you know, an integration of the elite, somewhat, but for like the vast majority of people, a lot of their lives have not changed
Yeah.
significantly in terms of poverty. And um, I think South Africa is also different because while they are, a pretty wealthy country, they are not the wealthiest country in the history of the world, which is what the United States is.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's kind of a different issue, and I don't know. I think if you read a book like Howard French's Born in Blackness, which is about the construction of the
Mm-hmm.
Atlantic world, I think it's really fascinating because it really explains the extent to which European breakout, Western prosperity, the Atlantic world is really built on black labor,
Mm-hmm.
and the wealth that black labor created. Even things like the mass production of sugar, making
Yeah.
coffee and tea more popular.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because now you
Mm-hmm.
could sweeten it. It's really, it's an incredible thing to think about, or like the depopulation of the West African mainland as a result of the incentivization of you black nations enslaving their opponents, in order to sell those people to
Yeah.
uh, you know uh, white people so that they could bring them abroad to Brazil, or to the United States. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a complicated question because on the one hand, I mean, I think the thing that you learn from it is that you want to be very specific. I think
Yeah.
the thing that's hard to learn from it is simply the fact that the U.S. has more money than all of these places and can afford to do more, in terms of addressing, um, addressing specific issues of harm caused by the U.S. government.
Absolutely. We can afford it. Before I let you go, listen, in the group chats that we are in and the places we occupy, I know for sure that you are a realist. But I
Hmm.
don't think people realize that reparations is actually happening in the US in some places, albeit very, very slowly. I'm thinking of Evanston, Illinois, where they distributed over $3 million up to $25,000 per person for their Black residents who faced housing discrimination. Do examples like that bring you any hope at all? Or do you think that this is a really, really long fight?
I mean, I think it's a really, really long fight, but I do think that local governments addressing specific instances of discrimination that occurred under their authority, I think is like actually a pretty good model. I mean, obviously they're not the federal government; they
Mm-hmm.
can't. They don't have that kind of money. States cannot, spend the way that the federal government can, and certainly municipalities can't. But I think, again, the issue always comes down to specificity. If you've done a specific wrong, addressing that specific wrong is simply justice.
Mm.
So to the extent that local communities are able to get that kind of justice, I mean, I think that's definitely something to be hopeful about.
Yeah. Are you at all hopeful about this Supreme Court docket coming up?
I'm not hopeful about it. I gotta tell you. I mean, I think I mean, one of the things that happened in the aftermath of Reconstruction was that the Supreme Court essentially wrote the Reconstruction amendments out of the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, um, with the except for corporations, of course,
Mm-hmm.
except for like commercial interests. They occasionally found that it was violating those amendments to force them to have like you know limited working hours, or proper working conditions or whatever. But you know that the context in which that happened was one in which with the withdrawal of the Union Army from the South, the Civil War amendments were basically unenforceable because you had a countryside that was controlled by armed white terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
So the most charitable argument you can make for the post Reconstruction court was like they, even if they had reached the right decisions, there was no way
Yeah.
they were able to enforce them. What the Roberts Court is doing is something much worse, which is they are taking these amendments and they are repealing them when there is the will and the capacity to enforce anti-discrimination law, simply because they think people should be allowed to discriminate, and that the real racism is when you ban discrimination. And so, this is, I think, a court that has, a certain level of narcissism in its belief that it understands the Constitution, even when it gets it flatly wrong, to a degree that, like, they have some sort of spiritual connection with the founding fathers that allows them to properly understand what they, exactly what their intent should have been, even if, even if it contradicts exactly what they said at the time. And so, they're just going to rewrite the Constitution to be whatever they want it to be, despite, claiming, to have this sort of system of constitutional interpretation that is capable of divining the precise will of the founders, except in the Civil War amendments when they just ignore the framers. When you look back and you look at like John Bingham and Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Steve, like, these guys were quote unquote woke by society standards. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. They were really, they talked about like abolishing the Electoral College. I mean, Sumner's like, we don't even need the 15th Amendment because the Constitution guarantees every state a Republican form of government, and therefore you cannot discriminate on that basis at all. This idea that what they meant when they adopted the 15th Amendment was and said no racial discrimination in voting, what they meant was actually you can discriminate if you want to be a partisan, is just complete nonsense. So if they're willing to do that, I just don't think there's really a limit on what they're willing to do beyond, their sort of own intellectual idiosyncrasies. Like, Neil Gorsuch, when he starts writing about Native American rights, all of a sudden, he really seems to get it. But other than that, I think it's really the only limit is like what gets a majority of votes. Otherwise, they can do whatever they want.
Okay, so you have no hope, or should we just cry into our yogurt? Is that like
no? I honestly no. I think what needs to happen, if you are unhappy with the direction of the Supreme Court, people need to make that clear to their representatives, and they need to push, otherwise pretty squeamish institutionalist Democrats towards court reforms that are either going to curtail the power of the court or limit the influence of its radical majority. Because what they're doing is dismantling the building blocks, the cornerstones of multiracial democracy in the United States. I wrote about this, 5-6 years ago. The issue is not that they're reaching that they are coming to policy conclusions that I don't like. The issue is that they are interfering with the ability of the people of the United States to govern themselves. If you look at like a Supreme Court ruling that says, if Alabama wants to draw its districts in such a way to remove all black influence from policy making, it can do that. Obviously that's not what the people who wrote the 15th Amendment intended, but also like that is not about like policy differences. That's not about like my views on abortion or your views on abortion or my views on taxation or your views on taxation. That is about you depriving the people of the United States of their right to a Republican form of government. And so, stuff like that, I think it is different from, policy issues that I feel very strongly about. On a fundamental level, the Supreme Court has become a threat to American self-governance. And to the extent that people want to change that, they need to press their elected representatives to do something about it. Now, I don't, when I say, I don't have any hope for the court. In terms of like them suddenly changing their minds. But they are not the last word on what the Constitution means. The people are the last word on what the Constitution means. And they can make a different decision from the court, and they can press their representatives to make a different decision from the court. So, I wouldn't say hope is lost, but it is up to the public, to the people, to demand something different.
If we're going to have hope, it's because we got active. Adam, thank you so much for joining us here at Undistracted, for really breaking this down and making it clear for folks. And I hope all of you all out there are reading everything Adam writes, because you absolutely should. We'll definitely be catching up with you really soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, y'all. I'm joined once again by our Untrending group chat bestie for our Untrending news. He is the CEO and executive director of the National Black Justice Collective. Nope, I was about to say coalition. That's old work. Collective is new, okay? Fresh off of Equity Week. My friend and yours, Dr. David Johns. How you doing, boo?
I'm excited to be here, excited to be on the other side of a wonderful Equity Week. If you missed it, save the date, the week of June 9th, next year, 2027. Be there.
Incredible, especially the ball. I mean, the
Every
legislating, the press conference, the lobbying, all of that is critically important. And baby, we have ourselves a time at the Howard Theater. Okay.
it did a movie because we deserve joy.
That
Yes.
we deserve joy, baby. It is a revolution when it's on us. Okay. So, David, you've been helping to push bills that could finally initiate reparations in Congress for a while now. Just last week during Equity Week, we were both at a press conference to uplift the fact that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, our homegirl, is now taking over championing HB 40, also known as the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act. Shout out to John Conyers, the very long time champion of that. May he rest. Also, your frat, yes, as it were. um, this bill, he introduced that bill every single year when he was in Congress for 28 years, from 1989 to 2017 when he passed away. And as the title suggests, it would establish a commission to actually analyze and study the harms that have been done, and is generally seen as a first step toward getting a national level reparations package approved. Latasha Brown's speech especially gave us chills. Doug, roll the clip.
I wanted to start in the spirit of the ancestors that not too far from here, that on this ground, on the Capitol, the same Capitol that this administration has created a slush fund that they want to pay those that sought to destroy it. But those that actually built it, that were my ancestors, never got paid.
So listen, even though the speeches were fire, we know that that's not going to be enough, even though it should be. We know that it's honestly hard to imagine this bill passing in today's Congress, especially if it didn't pass all that time that Mr. Conyers was putting it forward. Why do you think it's still important that we use whatever limited time and resources we have on an initiative like this? Because people are like, it's a whole lot of other stuff to pay attention to, girl. Like Trump is out here throwing cage matches. Why reparations?
I love the question, and I have three answers. I think the first and most important is that every issue connected to a policy problem or that we would otherwise name as important to address because of how it affects us existing as humans in a social order, every ill that we are continuing to suffer from would be addressed by reparations.
Hello?
For folks who can't understand this, I encourage you to go to, in addition to listening to Undistracted, go to Teach the Babies. The previous episode, by the time this airs, features a conversation with Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter.
Yes.
He talks like, what would happen if we all accept that every ill that all of us are dealing with, regardless of our socially constructed identity types, is a result of slavery? If we could conceive of that as a plausible question for us to grapple with, then a possible and plausible solution would be reparations. All forms of it, given that reparations is deserved for the many forms of harm that were committed against African people.
That's right.
And those who were otherwise affected by this racial hierarchy. The second thing, very much related to a beautiful, historic, contextually appropriate introduction or framing of this, is that this bill, H.R. 40, is the bill that the CBC has carried and introduced every Congress for the longest. It is the bill that they have had the longest heretofore. And that should tell us that if the conscience of the Congress, I have this cup holder on my desk.
Yes, the conscience of the Congress.
The founding members of the CBC, if they thought it important enough to continue to reintroduce this bill, in spite of all of the changes, in spite of the party associated with who occupy the Oval Office or were in a position of power, then we should understand the importance of continuing that fight. And then the last thing for me, Brittany, is that it is because our babies deserve to not only inherit the reparations that all of us are owed, and they deserve to understand the history. And so I was thinking about organizing my library, the importance of our babies knowing the history of Opal Lee, the godmother of Juneteenth, and of the legacy of Leslie Benningfield Randall, the 111-year-old only remaining survivor of the race massacre, right? In addition to Viola Ford Fletcher, who brought the landmark case that they still deserve reparations for. All of us deserve to not only say to those who are still living, Leslie Benningfield Randall included, we completed the job. but we also deserve to be healed as a
That's
result
right.
of the reparations that we so very much deserve.
You know, people always ask this question about why are we talking about this now? Put it off. There's more urgent stuff. How how long would you be mad if somebody refused to pay you for your labor and then you had children and they had children and those children had children and several generations later nobody has taken it upon themselves to give you what you are owed, let alone adjusting it for inflation, while they then profit off of what your labor created? Like, how patient are we supposed to be?
We're
How
not.
much longer are we supposed to put it to the side?
We're not.
Because I don't think anybody watching or listening would be okay with having their labor thieved from them, having that labor be backbreaking, family ending, uh, um, uh, and be endured by every single generation that you've born from your body. I don't think anybody would be okay with not receiving acknowledgement, repair, recognition, and recompense for that, no matter how long it's been. I'm holding Demario Solomon Simmons' book right here, Redeem a Nation. Demario is a friend of ours and is the lawyer who, among other things, has taken on the fight for reparations for the Greenwood massacre survivors and their descendants, right? Mother Randall, like you said, is 111 years old. How long is she supposed to wait? Till she's 112? 113? The fact of the matter is there are plenty of people who are just trying to wait her out.
That's right.
There are plenty of people who are just trying to wait for us to finally stop talking about it. There are enough people who just want us to give up, even though we seem to be able to find repair for people who don't deserve it. Because we're talking about a president who wanted to have a whole slush fund for the people who literally committed domestic terrorism against us and our government on January the 6th.
Let's be clear, he still wants it and is going to fight to get it.
That's right, and it's fighting to keep it. So, like, we need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that reparations is an illegitimate request.
That's right.
We need to get beyond the idea that it is unimaginable that people be paid for their labor, that the repair is made for the multitudes of generations of discrimination that were caused by and led by this government. And we need to understand, just like you said, David, that so much of what we are dealing with would be solved with reparations. If my granddaddy had just gotten his GI Bill, if our forebears had just been able to move into neighborhoods that gave them generational wealth and buy those homes, right? If the land had been given, if the mule had been given, if the wages had been given, we would be having a fundamentally different conversation about every single social ill in America, not just the ones that impact Black people the most. So I get frustrated when people are like, well, not right now. When? Right? As James Baldwin would say, how long do you want us to wait for your progress? David, before we go, let's be imaginative, right? Because clearly I'm pissed off to the highest level of pacification, as one should be about this.
As you should be.
And it is about opening up our minds enough to be radically imaginative in these moments. To not just demand that reparations is paid, but to visualize what that life looks like, right? What happens once they cut the check? What happens once the repair has begun? What happens, and what do we do with what we are owed? So I want to ask you, David, if we were to just wave the wand and reparations was implemented today, that we both walk out to our mailbox and we get what was owed our ancestors, what are the three things you would imagine would be different about the world we're living in, say, 20 years from today?
I love that question, and I'm going to do something that is uncharacteristic of a grandson of a Black Baptist preacher and not list three. I'm gonna give you one.
Okay.
So, Fran, remember, go back with me. Remember when Clubhouse was a thing?
I would rather forget, but yes.
Right. There are some moments, and it got us through some really hard times. What Steve Paget, I remember, a really brilliant innovator, said at the time was that it pissed him off that some of the smartest Black and brown people that we know are consumed with ending seemingly intractable problems or ending static or state-sanctioned violence. That's what so much of what we are consumed with boils down to. while at the same time that the most mediocre of white people and those who benefit from whiteness as socially constructed are frolicking. They are and have since gone to the moon. Not technically, that credit should stay with the Black man from California who actually did it, but the point remains, they are able to frolic. And so what I know is that when the checks that are overdue are delivered to those of us who earned them some time ago, and are continuing to as a result of the trauma that we inherited, are continuing to live through, that we would be able to frolic, that we would be able to center joy and grief, both individual and collective, and the type of healing that allows us to have transformative experiences that include us all getting closer to freedom together. Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter has written a book to help us in this grounding and unpacking and shifting with regard to what radical reparations is.
We love you, Marcus.
We love you, Marcus. One of the things he says is that reparations is a love letter to ourselves, to our community, and to our country. And so my hope is that we continue to rest in love.
I love that. And I'm thinking about back when we watched the Chappelle show before he took whatever turn he's taking now. Good God, what is going on with that man? But I remember maybe his first or second season, because this was when I was in college. I don't know if you remember it. There was a sketch about if we got reparations, right? And everybody was like fanning their money around, and they're like, oh, it's poor people around, and all of the jokes about like what Black people would buy, and what items would immediately be sold out. But my thing is, when we actually look at the data about what happens and what has happened in various guaranteed income pilots, right? Where people are given funds, just money, with no strings attached, no agenda, no reporting requirement. People like our friend Michael Tubbs, who leads Mayors for Guaranteed Income, helped pilot these kinds of innovations in Stockton, California. CDF has done that work in New York City. What we see is that people finally have the space to go from surviving to thriving, and they invest in thriving. They invest in their children's education. They invest in safe housing. They invest in healthy foods. They invest in all of the things that people need to be well. The truth of the matter is, a lot of people do not believe in reparations for Black people in particular, because they have assigned a pathology to us that says we cannot be trusted with money. There are folks who are like, well, you're going to go buy out all the Jordans, and you're going to go buy all the big screen, the flat screen TVs, and da-da-da-da-da. The data doesn't bear that out. Not only is that racist, the data doesn't bear that out. And so, to your point, it can be 3 things, it can be 10 things, it can be 100 things, but the thing is that I will see folks thriving. That's right. And when Black folks in your neighborhoods and your schools and your churches and your synagogues and your mosques and your swim clubs and your golf teams, when they thrive, when we thrive, everybody thrives. We make everybody around us better. And our wellness has continuously shown economically, politically, and from a policy landscape that when we do well, and when systems support us doing well, then they support everybody doing well. And it really, 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 really is that simple. And David, this is why we have the group chat, so that we can keep it all the way real like this and have these conversations. I love you. Thank you for joining us. As always, I know that I appreciate you, and so do all of our listeners. I'll talk to you.
Love y'all. Read the book. Talk to you soon.
Repair is not just for me. It's not just for my children or my husband, my mama, my granddaddy, or my ancestors. Repair is for all of us. There's no possible way for us to have a free next 250 years if we're unable, or rather unwilling, to examine why the first 250 wasn't all that free for so many of us. The social ills that so many of us face each and every day have everything to do with the fact that America isn't ready to reckon with itself, to fix itself, to look itself in the mirror and decide once and for all that that bright, gleaming example of democracy should actually come to fruition for everybody. That we should actually live up to those ideals and honor those so-called inalienable rights. Yeah, reparations is not just for me. It's for you too. And if we're not ready to repair, I don't know what the next 250 is going to hold. But we're the ones with the power. So let's decide now to repair, to begin again and to build anew. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being, and always, thanks for doing. I'm Brittany Packnett Cunningham. Let's go get free.